Okay, so thank you for joining this little talk about the Havhøst movement in Denmark, and I'm happy to be able to share some of the insights that we've collected in recent years, and I hope they'll be of interest to you here in Sweden. But let's just start with sorting out what this whole thing should be called. The organization that I founded 5 years ago is, as Lena said, called Havhøst. And to most of you, that may sound a little strange, since høst means autumn in Swedish, but in Danish it means harvest. So harvest means, it means ocean harvest, havhøst, and I guess havskörda would be the correct translation of havhøst to Swedish. In Denmark, we call the communal gardens, which we're working with, maritime nyttehaver. That's a sort of an umbrella term we try to promote, but the individual gardens, they call themselves havhaver, sundhaver, fjordhaver, or something completely different. And Maria, Carl Johan, and I have agreed to call them Blue Community Gardens in English. And I believe Maria has launched the term havskolonilotter in Swedish. Okay, so we're also working with partners in Norway, and I'm not even going to start this up with a Norwegian angle, but let's just say that it's good to know what we're talking about. But let's start with something familiar to most of us, the UN Sustainable Development Goals. For us as well, the central SDG is, for obvious reasons, SDG number 14, life below water. As you all know, our oceans are under extreme pressure from the combined effects of overfishing, nutrient overload from land-based agriculture, climate change. However, and this is one of the important points of the whole SDG concept, the individual SDGs cannot and shouldn't be seen independently of one another, and Havhøst actually covers no less than 9 of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. And I hope you'll be able to appreciate how and why we do that in about 20 minutes, which is the time I have left to talk to you. Okay, so after this short introduction, let's turn to the crops of the Blue Community Garden. In the Havhøst cultivation practice, the 2 primary crops are blue mussels and seaweed. In areas where salinity levels are high, the Blue Community Gardens also experiment with oysters. And this is the power trio of the regenerative era. Regenerative means that these crops perform a number of ecosystem services while they grow and turn into delicious and healthy food for humans. They require adding of nothing but water, no feed, no medicine, no pesticides, no nothing. I'll get back to the crops in a few minutes, but first, let me say that cultivation of these crops in itself is, of course, nothing new. Seaweed has been cultivated for many years in Asia and all over Europe. Shellfish are being cultivated. In fact, the commercial cultivation of these crops is one of the fastest growing sectors in worldwide food production. However, the focus of Havhøst is not so much the commercial growing of these crops. Our superpower is to get people actively engaged in a practice in the cross-section of sustainability, food, climate, and biodiversity at sea. For most people, though, it is really hard to fully comprehend the role of the ocean in the major challenges we face. We get an occasional glimpse when we, for instance, watch the new Seaspiracy documentary on Netflix. But any new understanding that we may have gathered quickly evaporates in our daily lives and worries. The ocean is something very abstract and very distant in most people's lives. And Havhøst offers a way for people to actively engage with these grand issues in a constructive way. Any number of small communal gardens spread along the coastlines of Denmark or Sweden will never have any real measurable effect on deacidification, biodiversity, or extraction of nutrients from the ocean, but as a meaningful practice for people to take part in, I think it's hard to underestimate the importance of initiatives such as Havhøst. Humans learn by doing, and the lasting change can only happen as a result of continuous active learning. And herein lies the real potential of blue community gardens. These gardens are set up as citizen-based initiatives, independently of commercial interests. In Denmark, they're organized as foreninger. Foreninger, det er det samme ord på svensk, tror jeg. Okay, so let's look at what exactly goes on under the surface. Blue mussels. Blue mussels are the potatoes of the ocean garden. They grow fast. They require a minimal amount of tending to. They're relatively easy to understand as a food ingredient for most people. And in addition, the blue mussel is a strong candidate for a sustainable food ingredient of the century. In Denmark, a new database with all our most common food items was recently launched. And in this database, Klimadatabasen, the CO2 footprint of various food items was compared. As you can see here, blue mussels carry an emission of 0.22 CO2 equivalents for every kilo of food. We can compare this to another animal protein, which is generally considered to be on the less climate offensive side, namely poultry, which has an emission of 10 times that of blue mussels. And finally, let's just take a brief look at a common vegetable, which you would expect to beat any animal source of protein by lengths, carrot. 0.25 CO2 equivalents per kilo of carrots. The conclusion here is, of course, that blue mussels are actually a more climate-friendly food than even carrots. And in addition to its qualities as a climate-friendly food item, mussels, as you probably know, extract unwanted nutrients from the ocean, just thus mitigating the adverse effects of our intensive agriculture. Mussels are a key crop for the communal blue gardens, where they are cultivated for human consumption in small-scale plots, which removes the potential negative impacts of line cultivation of mussels as regards defecation on the ocean floor, shadow casting, and so on. Now, cultivation of mussels in the water column starts in the spring with capturing wild mussel larvae from the water and getting them to settle on broad bands. In Danish, these bands are called bendler. You can see them here. White seatbelt-like ribbons. And once the larvae have attached themselves to these ribbons, they will, in a few months, transform themselves into baby mussels. And now is the time to transfer the mussels to mussel stockings, 2.5 meter long net tubes, which are then returned to the underwater garden. You can see them here. The mussels filter water and they gain in weight, and in a season or two, they're ready to be harvested. One of the other regenerative superstars, of course, is seaweed. In Denmark, we have over 400 different species of edible seaweed. And I imagine that something similar goes for Sweden. But when it comes to cultivation, sugar kelp has grabbed almost all attention. It's sugar kelp that you can see here. And from a gastronomic point of view, this is a little unfortunate. We would love to work also with seaweed variants such as dulse, søl, it's called in Danish, sea lettuce. But most of the scientific effort spent on seaweed cultivation has, up until now, been directed at sugar kelp. The thing is that cultivation of seaweed, unlike mussels, it doesn't start in the ocean, but in a hatchery. This complicates matters slightly. In a hatchery, spores are extracted from fertile seaweed and thereafter placed in containers with salt water, where salinity, nutrient concentration, temperature, and light is controlled. And in the containers, over a period of time, the spores attach themselves to a thin line, which is placed in this spore soup. When the spore lines are visibly full of like baby seaweed plants, the spore lines are wrapped around a rope, which is then returned to the underwater garden, where the seaweed will then grow. This process should start in fall. And in the case of sugar kelp, it will result in like beautiful leaves of kelp up to a few meters in length, ready to be harvested in the following spring. So it's a growth period of 6 months, 5-6 months. As regards seaweed as a crop of the future, much has been said. Besides serving as food for humans, the seaweed garden offers a habitat for marine species. And just as a forest on land, as a carbon sink, seaweed binds CO2 and breathes oxygen out into the oceans, thus reducing acidification and oxygen depletion, which are some of the major threats, of course, to marine life. Now, traditionally, regenerative crops, seaweed, oysters, mussels, have been cultivated in huge plots out on the ocean. This is a very simplified illustration of what actually goes on under the surface. In an open ocean garden, long lines, as you see here, are extended horizontally, and the crops are suspended from these lines, hanging down through the water column. In commercial cultivation in Denmark, these commercial plots can be up to 250 times 750 meters. But the blue community garden rarely takes up more space than a tenth of this. However, we have found that in many cases, it's quite challenging for a group of people without any formal maritime education or experience to establish and maintain an open water ocean garden, such as this one. It's not impossible, but it can be challenging. In Danish cities such as Ebeltoft, Vejle, and Tjärnö, local organizations have succeeded in setting up small-scale regenerative ocean gardens located about 30 minutes from their harbors. Here we are, for instance, in Tjärnö on Fynen. The garden, you can see it's placed where you see 4 yellow markers near the bottom right corner of the map. And you can see the city of Tjärnö in the top left corner. So it's like a 30-minute boat ride. But in order to have this farm, this garden, the locals have had to fundraise and acquire a vessel, this little boat. So they sail out in this vessel and they maintain their ocean garden, and this works for them. But they are an extremely dedicated bunch. They willingly and joyfully put a lot of effort into this blue adventure. But for those who find it a little bit too challenging with all the open water action, coastal platforms are also worth looking into. Here we are in the city of Løgstør, where they use a specially designed platform with oyster cages suspended from under the platform and arms jutting out from the sides, from which mussel stockings and a bit of seaweed can be hung. These platforms are even possible to combine into longer structures if a larger crop volume is required, as here in Aalborg, where 3 or 4 of these platforms are connected in order to feed the more than 100 members of that community garden. Of course, using a platform, the crops are much easier to reach than in an ocean-based garden. Accessibility is just so much higher. And this is one of Havhøst's most important considerations. The outreach potential of the blue community garden. we have actually found the need to take this even further and have designed and constructed what we call bølgemarken. It looks something like this. It's a 5 times 7 meter floating platform for the cultivation of mussels, oysters, and seaweed, and for education and dissemination. The cultivation of blue mussels and oysters takes place under the 24 hatches in the floor of the platform. And seaweed grows along the sides of the platform, suspended from some gear that we have installed. It has to be on the sides so the seaweed can get enough sunlight to allow photosynthesis to take place. One of the most important features of bølgemarken is the 2 harvest towers. You can see one of them in action here. They can slide back and forth on a rail system and raise the hatches up. So the crops underneath are made available. The first bølgemark was launched last summer in Copenhagen, and 3 more are on their way to other Danish cities where the locals want to combine communal cultivation with education and public outreach. In Copenhagen for the last 5 years, we have invited local schools to come down and learn about the transformational potential of regenerative ocean farming. Up until now, we have been visited by more than 5,000 students in the course of the years, as well as a number of other interested groups who book a tour and come down and see what's going on. But for us, there's no doubt at all that children are key. They're the most important target group for us. We currently offer a range of educational products based on the 3 regenerative crops of the blue garden: seaweed, oysters, and mussels. And we target pupils from age 11 to 16 plus. We also have high schools who come down and visit us. But for now, we have only offered educational services to schools in and around Copenhagen. But in 8 months or so, we will be active all over Denmark because of a new project with 9 partners from around the country. Maritime cultural institutions and nature schools who already have a local outreach and who are already visited by our local schools. And with these partners, we're developing an integrated Havhøst educational program called Haven i havet, Haven i havet, which will invite pupils to come down and experience their local blue community garden and learn about regenerative ocean cultivation. Before moving on to the next subject in this talk, which is rules and regulations, I'll just show you this illustration, which is central to our educational activities. The reason why I feel I want to show you this is that it shows how the eating human is our starting point. We strongly believe that our eating habits are one of the key challenges facing us today. We need to change our eating habits if we want to sustain human life on this planet. The human act of eating is the single largest source of stress to our natural world. And by replacing a few of our favorite dishes, we may actually, each and every one of us, contribute in a positive way to creating the change that we all need. Okay, so 2 years ago, there were 6 small community gardens in Denmark, and these gardens were started by individuals, or they were initiated by municipalities who had invited local citizens to take up ocean gardening as a non-commercial activity. Today, in Denmark, there are more than 20 blue community gardens. You can see them here, how they are spread all around the map. The blue dots on the map show active community gardens who are set up as foreninger and have an active cultivation practice going on. Some of these are some of these are based on open ocean gardens, as you saw before, but increasingly they're focusing on these coastal platform-based cultivations using bølgemarker or homemade platforms. Many of these are also tinkerers who like to construct things themselves, which is just fantastic. So we see a lot of creativity going on. The orange dots on the map, they are established as organizations. They're working on getting their blue gardens set up. And this requires some effort. You have to find the best spot. You need a range of permissions. You need to apply, and you need to get financing to secure the investment in gear and so on. The gray spots are places where we are currently working with the locals to kickstart a local blue community garden. Now, the question is, of course, how did we go from 6 gardens to more than 20 in just a few years? The obvious answer is that blue community gardens are so easy to love. They're all good. But behind that truth lies, of course, a lot of hard work just to even make it possible to start a blue community garden. And I'm just going to take you a little bit back in time to 2018 when we launched what we believe to be the world's first do-it-yourself kit for growing mussels, havbundens, muslingeset. In this kit, it fits into a bag, a small bag, and it contains all you need to set up a 10-meter mussel garden. Add only water. And when we launched this set, Fiskeristyrelsen, who handle all applications for mussel farming in Denmark, immediately reached out to us and asked what we were thinking, because they were like, you can't grow mussels like that. Mussels are grown commercially in large open water farms, and there we were with that little bag of mussel farming equipment. The problem was, of course, that public case management was based on handling these very large growing facilities. Each and every application took many hours to handle, including public hearings, environmental analysis, and a lot of other things. A number of other public agencies had to be involved, a big machine. Fiskeristyrelsen, they could easily imagine how suddenly they would be required to perform all these tasks for each and every tiny mussel garden in Denmark, which would just mean an enormous resource drain. So at this point, we were invited to take part in the development of an entirely new set of regulations directed at mussel gardens of up to 10 meters. A new application formula, this one, was developed for these hobby cultivation setups, and handling was set up so as to minimize resource consumption in Fiskeristyrelsen and other public bodies. One-page application, very easy, and so we were able to develop hobby cultivation even further. And now, after this success story with getting a new regulation set up for small-scale mussel cultivation, it was much easier to get politicians and public regulators to listen to us. And we've had really good relationships with the last 3 Danish ministers of fishery, and we work all the time on making the rules work to promote rather than restrain the diffusion of regenerative ocean cultivation. In a few months, we expect to see small-scale platform-based cultivation find its place in the rules as well. That'll make it much easier to get bølgemark and other platforms set up along the coasts. Another important effort from us has been to make it clear that harvesting from small-scale community-based cultivation should be accepted from all food-related regulations. This means that the Danish Fødevarestyrelse, I think it's called Næringsverket or something in Swedish, has nothing to do whatsoever now with blue community gardens. We're also trying to reduce the cost of setting up blue community gardens and to make it easier to set up gardens in which mussels as well as seaweed is grown, because currently mussels are handled by Fiskeristyrelsen, whereas seaweed is handled by Kystdirektoratet, another public body. And again, this reflects, in my view, an outdated way of looking at food cultivation based on one crop only in each spot. the future requires a much more dynamic and multi-trophic approach to food cultivation, so as to work with rather than against nature and creating synergies between different species and crops. Recently, we were asked by the Nordic Council of Ministers to try and see if there was a path ahead for blue community gardens in our neighboring Nordic countries, Norway and Sweden. And we asked Svinesundskommiteen, who are working on both sides of the Swedish-Norwegian border, if they wanted to step in as a project partner. They accepted, and immediately reached out to Maria Bodin of the University of Gothenburg, who had already done some pioneering work on this. And Maria luckily agreed to enter into the project as well, which is fantastic. And I look forward to hearing her talk in a little while. Now, before I hand you the microphone to Maria, I'll just tell you briefly what the project Havhøst is about. Its overall goal is to find out if there is an interest in coastal communities of Sweden to establish blue community gardens. I know that Maria is already in contact with people around Sweden who are curious to know more. The list is getting longer and longer by the week. And if interest is present, the next step will be to find out if and how current rules and regulations make it too complicated to set up these small-scale, non-commercial cultivation units. As I touched upon earlier, in Denmark, we've struggled, but we've succeeded also in getting lawmakers to listen to us and to set in motion revisions of rules and regulations, so these community-based initiatives could flourish. And finally, the project has as a stated goal to attempt to identify a host organization in Sweden and also in Norway, which can function as the national hub for blue community gardens. The three national hubs of Denmark, Norway, and Sweden will then be able to push the blue regenerative agenda even further, collaboration, Nordic projects, campaigns, and applying for funding together. Yeah, so that's Havhøst. And I'll just end with inviting you all to follow us on different platforms if you're curious and want to know more. On our website, you'll find articles and resources regarding crops, cultivation techniques, and many other things. You can also opt in for our newsletter. On Instagram, you can get a more visual impression of how we work and what we're up to. LinkedIn is our platform for more in-depth policy-related outreaches. And then, of course, there's Facebook, which we primarily use for communication with local audiences regarding events and other activities. I think that's it. I went a bit over time. I'm sorry, Carl-Johan. I'm sorry, Maria, but that was my fault. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Joachim. This was really, really interesting, and I'm really, really inspired of your work in Denmark. I will do a really, really short presentation, 5 minutes, elevator pitch. I'm not sure if that's an expression in English. To talk about the pilot study that I was conducted in Tjärnö laboratory at Gothenburg University last spring. So I'm Maria Bodin. I work as a coordinator here at the Gothenburg University. Scary Seafood is one project, and another one is I'm part of the project Marint Gränsforum Skagerrak, and that's the interreg project between Sweden and Norway. And in this project, we'll test this idea of a blue community garden, the future pain tree. And of course, we are really, really inspired of the Danish project Havhøst, and the big one with different models and things like that. But what we did at Tjärnö was we wanted to create a blue community garden in a simple and cheap way. We wanted to develop a model, a design. We want to test different species, tools, and methods. And we also wanted to start to map the laws, regulations, and permits. And I said start because it's quite complex, these things in Sweden. So that's the process. We also wanted to create a public information focusing on marine cuisine and aquaculture in the future. So what we did was we bought some booms, 8 meters in length and 1 meter in width, so we can walk on them easy. I also reused some old nets and cages that I was finding on the station. we tried out which species were suitable. That was sugar rack, oysters, mussels and sea snails. We hang out some settling ropes for the blue mussels and ropes with shoots of algae. We also wanted to connect different projects and knowledge about aquaculture and make the information available for the public. So here is some picture last spring when we were towing, placing and mounting the booms. And this is Joel, who works at Tjärnö, who helped me. We were also placing equipment in the garden, and in the picture there is Åsa, who works at IVL. So we've also placed some research equipment as well in the garden. And the goal and the vision for the pilot study was to gain knowledge how to construct a blue community garden, which species and method works, and the design of the garden. We also wanted to gain knowledge about what permits are required. We also want to inform the public about aquaculture, and in the future use the knowledge from the pilot study to be able to form a big blue community garden. And these are a few of the species that we were testing: sugar wrap or sugar kelp, sea lettuce, shore crab, blue mussels, tunicates and common prawns. And here's some pictures from the garden. Upper left, blue mussels. At the same rope we find tunicates. And lower left, there's some shoots of sugar rack that we put in the water in September. And the last picture is sugar rack two weeks ago, where they have grown a lot. So the result from this pilot study, when we will end it, it will be summarized in a report that will be published on the website. If you want to know more about the project, just visit the website Svinesundskommittén. And if you have any questions, just call me or contact me at the email. And thanks for listening. This is a really speed talk.